pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Tuesday, March 20th, 2018. Joining us on the line right now, live from Mexico, Tom Marshall of ESPN to talk about Liga MX and Mexican football. Tom, good morning.
Morning, Duane. Morning, Kevin. Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Duane is right here on the line. Tom, first of all, to start, what is surprising to you about last week's CCL results? We have Toronto and New York eliminating a Mexican team. It was historic on our point of view. From the Mexican side, we all saw the headlines that it was unacceptable. What is your thought about last week's in the CCL?
No, honestly, I think the key game, I mean, you can, obviously there's evidence both ways, but I think the key game is Toronto against Tigres, because nobody in Mexico can say Tigres aren't, one of the best teams in Mexico. I mean, the amount of titles they've won, the Copa Libertadores final, the way they've reached the final of the CONCACAF Champions League the last 2 years. I mean, this is a team that is really at the top. That's kind of, people say in Mexico that Tigres are going to be the team of the decade. Like Mexican soccer, kind of each decade more or less has like a team that dominates. And so Tigres are going to be the team of this decade. It very much looks like. So for Toronto side to, first of all, get the result in the first leg, but then come down to Tigres and play, not just get the result. It was the way they played, I think, that made people in Mexico kind of sit up and take notice in a genuine way. Because, I mean, we've had these results kind of before, but I think specifically Toronto FC has changed the conversation a little bit, because it's blatantly obvious that they're a very good side who play good football.
And when you're looking at the other side of this as well, New York getting a positive result, is that surprising as well? Yes, Tijuana is not Tigres, but still, were the people shocked in Tijuana?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But, I mean, again, I think if you look at that first leg, I mean, Tijuana got very, very little from the referee. I'm talking, at least 3 major decisions in that game that went against them. Obviously, they've got injuries as well. Gustavo Bo, the main striker, Iturbe as well, one of the other big signings, both out. So they had a severely weakened forward line. And I think that obviously didn't help at all. And then going up there to New Jersey, and it's difficult when you're chasing a game 2-0 behind, and obviously they got that first goal, but you have to push forward so much, then you're obviously you're likely to get hit on the break. So I do think there were kind of factors in that game that Tijuana will point to and say we're a bit unlucky. But then if you look to the other game, Seattle Sounders, they'd be justified in saying that was a shell of a Sounders side, if you know what I mean, with the amount of injuries that team had. I don't think it was a kind of just representation of what Seattle Sounders are and what MLS is. So that's why really I think that the Toronto Tigres game was the one that, really, for me, really stood out as kind of Toronto representing the very best of MLS, and obviously Tigres representing the very best of Liga MX. And for me, at the end of the day, it was a draw at the end. Toronto going through on away goals, but it was very even, and I thought that was more than anything really, really good for this competition, because it needs competition. I mean, that's what CONCACAF Champions League, doesn't matter what format you put in. It doesn't matter how you want to do the group stage and the knockouts, or when you want to do it. At the end of the day, the bottom line, it needs competition. It needs the kind of games that we saw last week. And I think the real winner last week was the CONCACAF Champions League, to be honest.
Tom, let's ask you this. In terms of the response in Mexico to the 2 losses, obviously fans are going to fan, and you as a journalist are going to take a step back and take the big look, like it's good for the CONCACAF Champions League. But how was the reaction there? Are people angry that the Mexican teams, 2 of them, went out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than anger. It's more kind of it kicked off a debate. I think you saw it not just on one network, on all the networks. Obviously on the digital side, everybody's talking about is MLS catching up? The age-old question is MLS finally making that step and challenging these Mexican teams? And obviously that's a worry, and people chip in. But honestly, the interesting thing is that most people think it is. I mean, if you take away the kind of headlines, the one we saw in Record saying it's unacceptable. If you strip away the kind of the tabloid style journalism, I think most people and most analysts are kind of I don't know if worry is the right word, but they're definitely respectful of MLS, particularly off the field. The organization, because it's just so superior to what we see in Mexico. The way it's structured, and I think that now it's being matched on the field as well. When you look at a team like Toronto FC, I think there is, it does set in that question that is MLS catching up. But like I said, not everybody buys into that, because we've all been here before. And at the end of the day, we've got these semi-finals now. Toronto America, Chivas, New York Red Bulls, and it could very well be an all-Mexican final again. And then then you get the other side again that this was a false dawn, that it's not. So I'd say that summarizes kind of the debate in Mexico.
All right. Well, we'll probably move it beyond last week into the future, into the Liga MX in a minute. But I did want to ask from a Toronto perspective, from a New York perspective, when you look at the two Mexican opponents that they're facing in this next round, who do you feel has the better chance from the MLS side, or I guess from the Mexican side, if you want to ask it the opposite way, of advancing to the final in terms of making it a non-Mexican side or final?
It's a really difficult one, because I think that there's no doubt for me that America is the more difficult opponent from the Mexican side. And I say that, America playing really well right now. They lost last weekend, but, they went 11 games in the Liga MX without defeat. I think Miguel Herrera's team, full of quality and playing well right now. And the other thing is that Toronto didn't have at Tigres is the altitude factor, because Monterrey is pretty low-lying. It's not really, you wouldn't take altitude into consideration in Monterrey, whereas Mexico City, we know everybody knows the historical problems away teams have had there. So I think that's going to be really difficult. But then the other side, Chivas, I don't think they played okay last weekend, but I don't think Chivas have got weaknesses. I just think Seattle Sounders weren't able to find those weaknesses. But teams in Liga MX have done this season. So Chivas, they have picked up the last couple of weeks. I think the win against Sounders, was a real boost for him, obviously. But yeah, it's a difficult one, because I feel like America, the stronger of the two teams, but they're also going against the stronger, for me anyway, MLS team. Whereas Chivas, New York Red Bulls, I don't know. it's a difficult one to judge. But yeah, I'd say both these ties are pretty fairly matched, to be honest.
You mentioned the altitude, Mexico City, Estadio Azteca, one of the three stadiums that have been chosen to represent Mexico into the United 2026 bid to get the World Cup back to North America. Guadalajara and Monterrey as well for the stadium. How is this bid perceived, Tom, south of the American border? And how is there a feeling of like 10 games, only 3 cities? Is it enough?
Yeah, 100%. That's the issue. Every time Deseo Di Maria is asked about it, and anybody else really who's got anything to do with the bid, it's the question is, why have we only got 10 games? We've held 2 World Cups before. We've got this heritage of hosting arguably the 2 greatest World Cups, or certainly two of the best. And so I think it's definitely the perception in Mexico is that this is definitely World Cup bid coming from the United States, and that they kind of slid Mexico in at the end because it makes it sound more united. It makes the region seem more attractive to vote for outside. So yeah, I'd say that's one of the things. I'd say the other thing is, if you're not going to change the fact Mexico's only going to get 10 of the games, then at least give the Azteca the first game. And I think that's one of the things that's up for negotiation, and that the Mexican side is really pushing for, to kind of sweeten this whole kind of joint World Cup bid with Mexico fans, and obviously taking consideration that I don't know, it's like Mexico. I doubt any team is going to be based in Mexico. You know what I mean? Maybe only Mexico will be based in Mexico. And I think part of the World Cup, it's not just the games. It's having teams based in your cities. It's I live in Guadalajara, and you speak to people who we went through 1970, and they've got stories about Brazil being here and Pelé and his relationship with people, and the way the team went about the business, and those are the kind of stories that really kind of make an impact, I feel, on a World Cup. And I think that the way the bid's structured right now, that Mexico it's not going to get that. So yeah, I think that's the big issue right now from the Mexican side.
If we're looking at this bid as a favorite still, even though Morocco has been gathering some steam lately, let's put ourselves in the future, and Mexico, Canada, United States have this World Cup. What will be the benefit for Liga MX, for Mexican football, to be part of this World Cup, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it brings a little bit more kind of interest from outside. I think that Mexico will also become the first nation to host 3 World Cups. So I think that the status, it looks good on the curriculum, and but for the Liga MX, I'm not too sure, to be honest, because I think all 3 of the stadiums that are going to be used at the World Cup are already in place. So it's not like Mexico's going to get a huge boost of infrastructure. And I think that's the other thing. I mean, I think you don't want, going into a World Cup, a situation like South Africa where you're building a ridiculous amount of stadiums, and even Qatar, and you don't know what's going to happen to them afterwards. But I think at the same time, you do want to see something new. You do want to see 1 or 2 new stadiums pop up that can then be used moving forward for something like for Liga MX play. And I think the way the bid's structured as well, Mexico isn't necessarily going to get that, because you've got the Estadio Chivas here in Guadalajara, and then up in Monterrey, the new stadium, and the Estadio Azteca. So yeah, I think that's something I would have liked to have seen, a kind of another city involved, and maybe a new stadium. Maybe I was a bit disappointed, to be honest, that somewhere like Tijuana wasn't involved, and maybe do something with their stadium, put on a proper kind of grass pitch, and because that's a real border town, and I think that would have sent a really important message as well.
Tom, I don't know if I've said this in the show or not before, but I had a source tell me that the current plan was, or the suggestion, again, the first.
We're trying to get him back on the line. All right, well, we've lost Duane and Tom. Live radio, folks. But we're line as we speak. One thing that I'm really wondering... Here we go. Duane is back on the line, and Tom as well. Duane, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
All right. I don't know what's happening today. The gremlins are in the show. Tom, I was telling you, I was talking to myself apparently, but I've heard that Mexico will, in fact, get the first game. Canada will get the draw, and that they will have the final, obviously, in the United States. So I don't know if that'll appease people. But let me ask you this. If this bid does go Morocco's way, what does that mean? Does that mean that there might be an impulse in Mexico to go for this themselves in 30 or 36?
I mean, it's a difficult one. I don't think there's I don't think the appetite's there right now to go it alone in terms of only Mexico. I think the 48 teams in the World Cup makes it really difficult. And yeah, just logistically, I think it'd be difficult. That's what I think I like. I like the idea. The idea of this US Mexico Canada bid is really strong. And obviously, like I said, on the Mexican side, the only thing is that only having 10 games, and you expect a few of those games to be Mexico games. Mexico play in Mexico quite a lot anyway, so I don't know. It's that side, but honestly, I think if Mexico could get the first game, and obviously, if this bid does go ahead and they do win the World Cup, I think getting the first game for people in Mexico would be huge. Honestly, I know it's not. I know they'd only be getting those 10 games, but I think that having that opening ceremony, having the focus of all the media be in Mexico City, be in on this country, and this is a country that hasn't had a great time of late. I mean, if you type Mexico into Google, a lot of the times there are negative news stories. Obviously you've had the drugs war and stuff like that. So I think that Mexico needs that kind of promotion, needs that kind of positive image put out there, and I think that's why it's so important for the Mexican side to get that first game confirmed, the opener.
Yeah, look, Canada's in it for the host spot. That's why they're doing this. They want to find a way back to the World Cup.
Yeah, they can play, can't they?
Yeah, it's been since '86. I've always been curious what Mexico is going to get out of this, what they want out of this. But I suppose any game's a game. All right, let's turn it to the league and the current standings right now. We talk a lot about the classic clubs, the traditional clubs down there, and we might have a question about Guadalajara and their struggles in a minute. But I want to talk about the team at the top of the standings right now in Santos Laguna, which is a team that's familiar to Canadian fans because they played both Montreal and Toronto in the CONCACAF Champions League before, but not really the most famous team down there. What has led to their success in the close season so far?
I think they're one of the smartest teams in the league in terms of kind of how they go about the business. I think they're a pretty progressive club. And I think they've got a manager in Siboldi this season who's put it all together. They've struggled the last couple of seasons, but I think Jose Juan Gallito Vasquez in central midfield has been massive. And then you've had the Cape Verde striker Giannini, who scored 12 goals in 10 games before getting injured. So yeah, a couple of injuries that have injury problems that have been sorted. Izquierdo's one of the centre backs, Nestor Araujo. I mean, those two playing together, I think possibly the best centre back partnership in Mexico. So I think that provides the platform, and then they're playing some good football, and obviously they're confident. Would I put them as one of the favourites for the title? No, still not, because obviously with this system, the split system in Mexico, the playoffs, then you'd still go for someone like Tigres or America or even Monterrey, who aren't playing particularly well. You still feel that going into a two-legged playoff tie, that those teams would come out against Santos Laguna. But if they can carry on playing like they are, then you wouldn't completely rule Santos out.
A few weeks ago, it was announced that Liga MX is putting an embargo on promotion relegation for their first two leagues over the next few years. Yes, the system was complicated to begin with, and it was an amalgamation of different results and a coefficient over multiple years. But is it something that big clubs are happy about? If we're just talking about Chivas, that would have been in the conversation maybe in the next few years. Is it a relief for the fans of Chivas, and is it maybe a discussion point that the club owners are happy about not having a chance to go down to Division 2?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're basically protecting their investment, if you like. But it's different in MLS, because in MLS you go into it kind of without the prospect of promotion, whereas in Liga MX it exists. So yeah, I mean, I think for the league owners' point of view, they're very happy, and I think it's something to understand about the way the Liga MX is set up as well. I mean, the Liga MX owners, the club owners, have massive power. And so these guys get together and basically make the decisions. It's not like, there's the league president, Enrique Bonilla, he does his thing, he does negotiations kind of internationally, but at the end of the day, the power lies with the club owners. And so obviously if you're going to, if somebody comes up and say, why don't we get rid of promotion and relegation, then obviously they're all going to be pretty happy about it. Because they're protecting their products, but in terms of the wider debate in Mexico, it's massive, because at the end of the day, there's a fear that at the moment it's only been kind of suspended for 2 years, but the fear is that after those 2 years, they're just kind of going to get rid of it altogether. I mean, at the end of the day, the system that's in place right now doesn't work. So I do think you have to praise them for at least trying to tackle the problem. But obviously, I think that a country the size of Mexico, with the amount of kind of big towns and the football culture that exists absolutely everywhere, I find it incredible that they can't be kind of two teams, 34, 36 teams split between two divisions with proper promotion and relegation, and that if somebody wants to come and invest in a second division team, then there's a clear pathway to go into the first division. Because at the minute, it's worked out from points per game ratio based on the last 3 years. It's just it's a system that It's so difficult to get promoted. I mean, it's difficult to get. You have to be pretty bad to get relegated, but it's also very difficult to get promoted because you have to win a tournament, which is based on a playoff, and then you have to play off against the other team who wins the other kind of championship in the same season. So it's extremely difficult. And if I'm an investor looking at second division clubs, then I'm thinking it's extremely difficult. I've got no guarantee of going up, even if I'm the best team by quite a distance. And I think that is also a stumbling block for potential investors.
I mentioned Chivas Guadalajara a minute ago, and I suppose they're just Chivas or Guadalajara, depending if we don't have Chivas USA anymore, so I don't have to distinguish. But I'm curious, what is the root of their struggles right now, and whether you feel that that's a club that can turn it back around and get near where it's traditionally where its fans expect it to be, nearer to the top of the table.
Yeah, there's been a lot of issues. They won the title less than 12 months ago. I think the season after that, it was kind of a title hangover. They had a few injuries. A few players went with the national team. So you could kind of understand last season they didn't do too well. But this season, they sold Gallito Vasquez, the player who's moved to Santos Laguna. And I think that's been a massive blow. They've had injury problems once again, but it's a club that needs constant investment. I mean, this is a massive club, not just in terms of Mexico, but on a world scale. This is a club that boasts 40 million fans. And I feel like they failed to keep investing in the playing squad, basically. I don't think they have one or two injuries and all of a sudden they have real problems. And, that's coming at the same time. It's an all-Mexican team as well. So it's obviously a lot more difficult for Chivas to go into the transfer market and buy players. I mean, the constant accusation by the club is that when they go and try and sign a player, then the selling club ups the price because they can't go to, Colombia, they can't go to Argentina and buy a cheaper version of the same player. They have to buy, domestic products. So it's difficult for them in that regard. But at the end of the day, it's also that the fact that they're all Mexican is such a powerful symbol that, I think a lot of fans buy into that, and I think they win financially from that as well. So I think a few things off the field as well. There's been problems within the structure, but yeah, I think Chivas overall is a good team. It's just not clicked so far this season. But the last couple of weeks, I think after the Sounders game, I think they played well against Sounders, and then against Tigres last weekend there was another good performance. So I think the fact that they've got the CONCACAF Champions League to look forward to is massive for them, because I think it's given it looks very unlikely they're going to make the playoffs in Mexico. So I think making the semi-finals of the CCL is huge, and I think it kind of provided them with a focus.
I got to tell you, from sitting here in Toronto, the idea of having Tigres followed by America followed by Chivas coming into my stadium is mouth-watering to think about. I suppose you. At any rate, I'd be remiss if I didn't finish the interview by asking you about the one Canadian that has made the breakdown there in Liga MX, Lucas Cavallini, and we'll sort of get an update on him. Do you think he'll end up staying once the loan is over?
I tell you what, if it's up to Puebla, I can't imagine a scenario where they don't want him. Put it that way. I think he missed a penalty last weekend late on, but apart from that, he's been brilliant. He's really been exceptionally good. Obviously, so good at holding up the ball, bringing others into play. 9 goals in 20 games this season. So he's scoring record for a team that isn't one of the big teams. For him to be the starting centre forward and to have got 9 goals in 20 games is a real positive. You can tell he's played down in a country like Uruguay before, to be honest, because he's got that. He's tough. He's a really, really tough player, and he's adapted to Mexican football with absolutely no problem at all. So yeah, I think for the Canadian national team, it's a massive positive what he's achieved in Mexico. And I'll tell you what, if he keeps it up, I can't imagine him being at Puebla for too much longer. I think other teams, both in Liga MX and MLS, are going to be pretty keen to bring him on board.
Fair enough. All right, Tom, ESPN, as we mentioned, anything in particular that you want to promote before we say goodbye? No, just Mexican games coming up, so I'll be going up to cover them. And really just busy now from now till the World Cup with the upcoming international break,
CONCACAF Champions League, Mexican playoffs, and then obviously the squad announcements. So yeah, looking forward to a busy few months.
It's 12 weeks to the World Cup. Don't tell Kevin, it's terrifying. All right, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. Duane, you were talking about Lucas Cavallini to Tom, and I have to say it's a good segue to what we're going to talk about right now. Canadian men's national team has named its roster last week for the upcoming camp and the game against New Zealand. John Herdman's first game as the head coach of the Canadian men's national team. What is your thought on Lucas Cavallini and his progression in Mexico?
Well, obviously, it's exciting from a Canadian national team perspective, although we should say off the top that, of course, he's not in this camp, which caused a lot of people some consternation. But I think that really, when you look at it and think about it for a second, the reason he's not in this camp is precisely because he is doing so well in Mexico, and they don't want to screw it up. There's been many examples in the past of Canadian players, and I think back especially in the 90s when I first started to really follow this program closely, there was a lot of examples back then of players that would be getting time in their club teams, usually in the second division or championship of England at the time, and then they'd pull them for this Canadian camp, and then they'd never see the field again. Now, we're not suggesting that's going to happen with Cavallini. We don't know for sure, but if you got a guy in a situation where he's doing well at his club and he's fitting in and he's fighting to maybe stay there permanently or move to a bigger club, then there's really no reason to move him to a camp to play New Zealand. Because really, Kevin, when you look at the players on this list, and you look at the names in this list, I should say, the most important name on this list is Herdman, John. This is what this camp is about. It's for these guys to get used to him, for him to look at some young players, and there's some young players on this list, and for us to figure out what the hell John Herdman's Canadian men's national team is going to look like.
Yeah, and that is a question, and that is the reason behind this game too, right? This game was announced after John Herdman was named the head coach. So the entire idea behind this is introduction to the new era of the Canadian men's national team.
Yeah, precisely. I do think it's good to get into the habit of playing in every window, and we didn't. Canada, of course, did not play a January friendly this year. That's usually they play Camp Tinbit. We've been calling it the last couple of years to emulate the Camp Cupcake that the Americans have, yep. and they played the Americans a couple times in that situation. Didn't have that one. Skipped the February window because of sort of, I guess, turnover and trying to get everything set up to go. So I would hope that we would see Canada playing in each of the FIFA windows that are still open before the World Cup, and in particular getting there in May and getting a camp in May so that maybe you can take advantage of getting a friendly against one of those countries that is preparing for Russia. Then obviously that friendly would probably take place on neutral ground or in the country that's going, but you would hope that maybe they could take advantage of that as the World Cup grows nearer. Because obviously we're not going to the World Cup, as we well know. Neither is the U.S., and both these countries have to take this time to reevaluate and get things set up, because it is not long, as we all know, until 2022 starts back up. You could be, if you're Canada, we're used to being eliminated before we even realized it started sometimes.
Sometimes? Most times.
Well.
Most times. Speaking of Canada, and here, I know we didn't talk about this before we started this segment, but I have the chance to talk to a lot of Canadian players already this season, right? Samuel Piette, Michael Petrasso, Raheem Edwards are playing for Montreal. You still have a lot of Canadian content with Toronto, Jonathan Osorio leading the way. And there's the same around the league, the Alphonso Davies and others as well. There seems to be dare I say, a rise? Do we see the rise? I don't know, but in my perception, seem to have a bit more Canadian content playing this side of the pond, and we'll see how that is beneficial or not. And I think it's a good segue metaphorically into the Canadian Premier League too, having maybe a bit more Canadian players playing here already, and we'll have a lot more in a year and a half. So no, hopeful could I be a hopeful, Duane? Can I be a hopeful? Is it dangerous?
Well, yeah, it is. But, in terms of your first point there, obviously, this is look at these teams here. We've gone through an evolution of watching these Canadian rosters. I have from a point where there was a good mix back in the really early days when I was a kid. It was almost entirely made up of NASL players and a few NCAA players thrown in for good measure. That was back when the NCAA was a little bit stronger. And then it evolved almost 180. Of course, there was no real, MLS was still very much, an emerging league, to put it politely, and there was no Canadian teams in that. So we went to a point where everyone on the Canadian roster was pretty much playing in England, mostly, and the occasional guy playing in, God knows where, Luxembourg or something. You'd find weird stuff like that. And now we're kind of evolving back where just a quick look through here. You've got just a quick count here. You got I think it's 14, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count 8 players that are Toronto and Montreal on this, right? So
exactly. And across the league, there's more as well. So you, like just the Mark Anthony Kays of this world in LA, who's doing well so far, and he's just one of those examples. So I do see a certain generation stepping up, trained here or elsewhere, a la MAK or a la Samuel Piette. Samuel Piette is slowly showing us just how good he can be. And from words of Rémi Garde in the press conference on Saturday, mentioned Samuel Piette did good, but I expect even more from him. I have higher expectations from him because I know he can give me more. That just tells you they're not just playing. They're influential now here, and that's another level we got.
Yeah, well, look, and Osorio, same deal on Toronto side. There was an interview with Greg Vanny and with I forget what it was, Michael Bradley or Josie Altidore, where he said that they rip Osorio in training all the time. They're hard on him. Josie said, "I'm hard on Jonathan," or Johnny as they seem to be calling him now. Because I see his skill, I see how good he is, and he doesn't give it to us all the time. And maybe that drive, maybe that sort of pressure that's being put on them internally in their clubs is something that's good. Because, look, there's the argument against quotas, and I've always been an advocate for making it a little bit easier for Canadians to play in this league, and I still maintain that. I think obviously we need to open it up a little bit more in the U.S. to beat a long dead horse. But
domestics? Are you talking about Canadians as domestics?
Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, I've been talking about that for 10 years. But that aside, I do understand the argument against it, which is, well, they get complacent. And maybe some of these guys, particularly, I'm not in Jonathan Rosario's head, for instance, or Samuel Piatte's head, but both of these guys had it pretty easy for a long time at some point in their career. And I think that maybe Kyle Becker's another name I'll throw out at you that had it really easy for a lot of his career, and maybe they thought that they were leaving the press clippings, and when they got to a higher level, they struggled to break through. And now we're seeing Piette's landed in an important role in Montreal after sort of floundering around a little bit in Europe in the lower divisions, not quite making it as high as he thought. You look at Osorio, he's becoming a very important piece of TFC after a year when many thought that he might be in his final year with TFC last year. So this pressure that's out there for these guys, I think is a good thing. That's why people that were like kind of, when Lauren made the move to Besiktas, were like, well, he won't get playing time there, and he'll blah, 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 blah. He maybe has to go on loan. I'm like, good. He needs to fight. Maybe that's what's the problem in Orlando is it was too easy for him. It's been too easy for him in Connecticut. It was too easy for him in Orlando. He needs to be put in a position where he needs to win it. And I'd be interested to see what Lauren looks like after a few months of limited playing time, but training and trying to fight for that spot all the time. Lots of interesting names on this. This roster is a nice split of old and new, I think, Kevin, when you look at it carefully. You've got Arfield on there. You've got, interestingly enough, Atiba Hutchison coming back, so that's a good sign there. Guys like Liam Millar, though, who the young Liverpool kid that just signed a full pro contract there. There's lots of interesting
sort of
quality.
It's his first look, isn't it? It's his first look with the senior team, isn't it?
Yeah, he was with the U20s, but yeah, first look for the senior team for sure.
And even a Raheem Edwards, who hasn't played a lot in Montreal, first start and then 20 minutes on the second one, but still there. And Petrasso. Players that Petrasso has been played every single minute of the Montreal Impact so far, in a different role sometimes, but like it's not things that are. It's uncommon, and we're not used to it, and I'm happy to see it be more common more and more, right? Yeah. Those things are going to continue happening in the next 12 months, and I'm happy to say that. I know it's just players from Canada playing in MLS with Canadian teams and just playing well for once, and academy product or not. But there is a renewed sense of pride, I feel, with the supporters sections and fans and just fans of the teams because of those players in both Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver with Davies too.
No, for sure. And look, absolutely. And that's great to have them here. And I think that from the most important thing that having 8 players, I said, between Toronto and Montreal, I guess there's a former Whitecap on there if you want to go with that. We do have Unattached FC is represented, so don't worry, folks. David Edgar.
And I'm surprised David Edgar didn't sign for Montreal over the last few weeks. Montreal kind of needed center back. Now maybe not with the upcoming arrival, probably, of Rudy Camacho. What a great name. Rudy Camacho. Yeah. He's either a bad guy, a villain in a movie, or a great restaurant by the beach or something.
Yeah, well, and hopefully this camp can help David Edgar find something for the summer. I mean, I don't know what his options are. If not, I mean, obviously, as a free agent, he can sign an MLS, right up until the freeze, which doesn't happen for quite a while. But you hope he gets in there.
May 8th, I think it's May 8th, and then it opens up back in late June.
Yeah, some team might get an injury at some point, and keeping him active is a good thing there. Interesting, Mark Anthony Kay obviously had a good start with LAFC, sort of emerging into that new role. I was talking to a few people about MAK and how it's now felt largely within the Canadian system that they don't want to directly compare him to Hutchison, but they think that maybe he might be the person who moves into that role when Atiba retires. Obviously, Atiba has reached a level of success that, MAK can only dream of at this moment, but
captain of his team in the Champions League, that's that level,
Yeah, but in terms of like the type of player that they think he's going to become, they think he doesn't have the speed to be too much wide. He's going to play more of a central role, more of a distributing, more of a stopper role, and that's kind of what he's playing with LAFC right now. So yeah, that's interesting too, and it's nice to see Atiba in there if in fact that is the long-term plan for him to have that kind of situation for him. Look, I'm excited to watch this game. It is going to be streamed on Canada Soccer. We're in Toronto anyway. There will be a viewing party. We're still TBA in terms of or TBD in terms of where it will be. We have an idea. We'll announce that on my Twitter feed and probably on this show near the end of the week if you want to join us for that. But it's been a while since I've been excited to watch the Canadian men's national team. The Gold Cup, I guess, but in a friendly, this is just so much interest. What kind of tactics is John Herman going to play? Is he just going to roll this out? Like, we just don't know. This is a blank slate in many, many ways.
Speaking of the Canadian men's national team and excited to watch them, maybe we'll have a chance to watch Canada next year play against, I don't know, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, Peru. Yeah.
Venezuela. That's got some beatable teams in this list. The Copa America, obviously the Centenario, which was the very first tournament this Soccer Today covered. We launched on the opening day of Copa America Centenario.
The Centennial Cup.
The Centennial Cup, yes, exactly. So that's kind of a throwback. And there's suggestions that Canada will be one of 3 teams invited from CONCACAF, which has led a lot of people to sort of go, what? But when I look at this a little bit more, I think what this has to do with is sort of an olive branch being put out to Canada as part of that United bid. And maybe we'll talk about the United bid on Five Rings this week. That might be a worthwhile topic because there's lots going on there. And that might be what this is about. To sort of the South American Confederation is probably quietly supporting CONCACAF in this bid because they want to host 2030 as the 100th anniversary of the World Cup in Uruguay and Argentina. So that is likely where that's coming from. And there's some thought there. And there's also some thought that this might just be part of their ongoing strategy to increase their TV presence of this tournament. They look at Canada as, okay, well, they follow the World Cup and pay pretty good World Cup right fees. Yeah. So if we can get Canada in this tournament, then we can get a rights fee from Canada, which will increase the financial gain from this. But in terms of the on-the-field performance, if this was a video podcast on my end, if we get a lot of Patreons, you would have seen me cross myself when you said that. So that's, yeah.
You're like, oh no, please, Neymar, don't.
I remember the Argentina friendly. Oy. 5-0, folks.
No, Messi, and Messi beats Crippo. Messi goes again. Messi beats Crippo. Oh, Messi around Edgar, around Diaz, around everyone, around Herdman, and then Messi scores again.
It was Tevez back then in that friendly, but that ripped Canada a new one, if you know what I mean. But look, yeah, you can only get better by playing good teams, though. So obviously this would be good news for Canada. But in terms of the Confederate, like as a journalist, I can step back and go, I don't know whether they deserve it.
You're like, but okay, we're here to learn. We're here to learn.
But as a fan, all right, bring it. It's kind of my thoughts on that.
Hacka Messi. That's going to be the new tactic. Just foul them. Foul them.
Can you imagine? David Edgar ends Lionel Messi's career. That would go over well. We wouldn't get the World. They'd pull the World Cup from us that they gave us at that point. Sorry, guys.
Canada banned from soccer playing forever.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, there you have it.
Let's talk with you. Exactly. Let's finish the show with the United States U.S. men's national team. Duane, same thing for them, in the same position as Canada. They're not making the World Cup, and they're having friendlies.
Yeah, precisely. And look, from a Canadian perspective, the story up here is that there are 2 TFC players involved in this camp. That's not shocking because, TFC haters in Canada will call them Team USA, and there certainly is a lot of American content on TFC. There's no doubt about that. Marky Delgado gets a look. A lot of people are really happy about that. Alex Bono, which is in that mix, along with Bill Hamid and Zach Steffen, the 3 keepers that are going up for the U.S. game against Paraguay, which is on Tuesday, by the way, and the Canada plays New Zealand on Saturday. Those are the 2 game times that they're preparing for here. The goaltending position for the U.S. is an interesting one right now because they really are in a transition. You look at Old Man Howard screaming at people from his his hut in the forest or whatever the hell. He looks like he's a mountain man now.
Yeah, and Old Man Guzan too. He's not a young gun anymore too. So you got a spot open up and like all the. That's the thing with goalkeeper position, right? If you have one goalkeeper there for a long run, all the backups become old too. So you're gonna have like 3 spots open in the next 3 years or something.
Yeah, well, there's a combined 6 caps in the goaltending positions right here. I'm just quickly looking through this. I've got the caps listing here. This is a very inexperienced team. Yedlin is on it, 49 caps for Yedlin. That's probably the most experienced player on the defender's side of things. Just quickly, you got Nagbe with 24 caps. It's the most experienced midfielder cap on this. In terms of up top, Bobby Woods there with 36. So this is not exactly a high-end experienced team, as you would expect. This is absolutely, this period, you're not used to it, American listeners. We understand exactly what you are entering. You are in purgatory right now. This is the purgatory period of any national team where you're not really preparing for anything. You're just sort of looking at things. And it's kind of hard to get up for these games. I mean, as I said a minute ago, Canada certainly has the interest of the Herdman situation. Where if I'm an American fan, this is really just looking at the young players. Like I would want to get Alex Bono a cap and see what he looks like in an international setting. I would look to put Carter Vickers out there or Moore or Palmer Brown, like guys that don't have a lot of experience at the international level. I would want to get them out there and have a good look at them if I'm the Americans and those older guys that are in camp. They're just there to sort of solidify things and teach the young guys, in my mind, what it means to be in a camp. And you may sniff at that because of the failure in the World Cup, but it's purgatory. It's tough, and it's hard to really evaluate these games beyond that. We'll of course follow them next week and talk about them after they happen, as long as I can get a stream for this one. That's going to be the challenge here. It won't be aired in Canada, obviously, but
I want to finish the show, Duane, just when you mentioned Alex Bono, and I still am shocked. Not even 2 years ago on this show, when he was drafted and we were looking at his first training camp and his first games for TFC2, and you were less than convinced about Alex Bono. Quillian Roberts was ahead of him in queue. How things have changed. Where to have time gone? And damn, kid became good real quick.
He always was a good shot stopper. Right? His distribution and sort of decision making was where I had issues with him, and he's still not perfect in that regard. His distribution remember the first goal Tigres scored against TFC?
It's a terrible goal kick. Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
So that's just an example, and obviously it's an outlier maybe, but opportunity, man. He played. He got the playing time. He happened to be the guy on the bench when Irwin got hurt, and he was thrown in and made a mess of it in that first game in Orlando. But because he was the one there, and their decision was to keep him in, they've always been high on him, so they always were a little higher on him than Q anyway. But had Q been the guy on the bench that day, which at that point in time was just a rotation, they were flipping them back and forth. Q would be on TFC2 on 1 week, and Bono would be there the next week, and the other would be serving as the backup. Had it been Q that day and he'd gone in and done well, who knows? It's all about opportunity, and that's what makes keepers so difficult to develop in this current situation in North America, and why the USL project is so important for MLS. Is because you got to get these guys playing, otherwise you're going to be continually relying upon older keepers, and we're seeing that in Canada. We're not like. Borean is our keeper, is our number one right now, but Borean didn't grow up in the Canadian system, right? So then
it's Kerpo, and then it's Jason Bolliers or the James Pentimus, which are not there yet, but they're like in Q. No offense to Q Roberts, in QCUE. But when you're looking at Alex Bono, a super draft prospects as well, which is in a way one of the best goalkeepers, at least from I can remember, in this era maybe, to come out of the super draft. It's a position that usually, I don't know, maybe it's just the recency bias perception, but usually goalkeepers find the academy system and the long training aspect, the long mental, physical development pathway of learning and standards of an academy versus maybe college to find their way to develop their craft. So for a Bono coming out of the super draft and being now the number one goalkeeper for Toronto, not even 3 years after, it's still surprising.
Yeah, no, and good for him. And he has done well. I can't argue this anymore for sure. As I said, opportunity is key. All right, Kevin, before we quickly, just housekeeping stuff, a couple of shows coming down the pipeline today that I recorded yesterday. 5 Rings wrap-up of the Paralympics. I will be recording something about that today. And as I said earlier in the show, I certainly think that we're going to hold a little bit of our United 2026 bid talk for our 5 Rings program, because it fits in there nicely, and it allows us to sort of have crossover sort of appeal when we put those shows on. One last one I want to get out there is I will be doing an interview. I haven't talked to Kevin yet about whether he can be part of it, but I will be doing an interview to preview the NWSL tonight. We'll let you know when that will air. All right, Kevin, that's all my housekeeping. You have anything you want to wrap up with, or just say goodbye if not?
Well, 2 shows that Duane produced yesterday will drop in the next hour or so. A sort of revival of USL Radio and sober second thoughts for the Toronto game on Saturday. And as always, we'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. live here on Soccer Today on youtube.com and /Sports Podcast Network. I want to thank all our Patreons. Thank you very much. There's been a few in the last few days. Gonzalo Solis, thank you so much for your pledge as well. Chris, Don, John, there's a lot of you guys, and I'm truly touched. And please take the pledge. Help us continue to produce independent journalism, produce more podcasts. You see already with the influx of Patreons, there's been an influx of shows. It will continue. The more you give, the more we give. And you can do that at patreon.com/sports podcasting network. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.